There are some things that have happened as we expected in the few data points we have in the 2023 college football season for the Michigan football Wolverines. But there are some things that have not. Therefore, today we are going to discuss expectations versus reality. On this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Thursday. We are back in doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And there are a lot of things that we thought that, hey, this is happening. This is what this is going to look like. You know, this is what where the strengths of the team are. Here's where the weaknesses are. I mean, there hasn't been a ton of weaknesses. Only 2 data points against 2 group of 5 opponents. Therefore, this isn't exactly what may be a strength right now might end up being a weakness later. What might look like a weakness now might be a strength later. We've certainly seen in the early going things change. So let's start with the offensive side of the ball. Let's discuss what the expectations versus reality, because when I think about the thing that I said I was most confident in, it was bar none, it was obvious, it was 100%, this is my number one position group, it's the offensive line. Now, there are good things and there are bad things that we are seeing at the moment. I'm not as good of an X's and O's person as a lot of you people out there. I'm not going to pretend to sit there and try to insult your intelligence, my own intelligence, by pretending that I have a really good handle on this. But what I am going to say is, there are a couple things that are kind of what we expected and some things that maybe just aren't. And when it comes to what we did expect, I think the pass protection has been phenomenal from the first team. That has been obvious. Not having let up a sack. JJ is very rarely flushed out of the pocket. I mean, it doesn't matter who, right? Like, there's going to be, you could put Hawaii against Georgia. There's going to be a time here and there where the quarterback is going to have to move either up in the pocket or out of the pocket. It's just going to happen, right? Because these coaches and players are good enough to be schemed at least into a position where they can make something happen. But generally it hasn't been the case. They've picked up blitzes very well. They've handled business very well when it comes to the pass offense. That's gone really well. Obviously, the run game has not been anything crazy. I don't think it's necessarily as bad as some people might say. Certainly, there has been a loading up of the box by the first 2 teams. I do expect that to change. Maybe not this weekend, but certainly once you get into Big Ten play, because there is an understanding of what kind of balance these teams have. It's higher competition. They're going to do things a little bit differently, right? So I'm not terribly concerned when it comes to it, but certainly if you would have asked me before the season, my expectation is, they're going to do like they did last year and run for like 300 yards a game to start, right? These are not great defenses or great opponents, but that hasn't been the case yet to this point. So certainly we have to manage those expectations. Now, like we said on the show a few days ago, if you look at Michigan's output in the first 2 games, it's like the first and third game kind of ish. When you go back to maybe it was the first and fourth in 2021, this is not terribly unprecedented, and we know that the run game was still the strength of that team. I mean, Cade McNamara made big plays, JJ McCarthy made big plays, but really it was Hassan Haskins, Blake Corum, and the offensive line. With that said as well, offensive line and a reason to not be concerned for there are some missed assignments and some uncomfortability. I mean, Miles Hinton was the first person out there that said, like, listen, I didn't play as good as I could have after week 1. Certainly things looked a little bit better in week 2. And you saw that as a result. There's some missed blocking assignments by wide receivers and tight ends and things of that nature that we haven't necessarily seen. They're going to get into a groove, right? 2018. No one felt that offensive line was very good, that it was still a continuation of 2017 going into the season after the first game, after the second game. It wasn't until week 4 against Nebraska that finally everyone was like, this offensive line might actually, is it good? Is this a good offensive line? So it can take some time to settle into the season. So that's the obvious number one, expectations versus reality. Expectations versus reality, JJ McCarthy edition. I mean, I probably could go running backs first, but let's start with JJ. I mean, he's doing not only exactly what you would expect, right? Like if he was left in for the whole game of each of the last two, I mean, he'd have 300 plus yards passing in each. He would be getting, I mean, when you finish it around 280, he had 280 week 1, 278 week 2, and all of that, you'd sit there and say like, oh, that's really good, but 300, when you go over 300, there's something that's a little bit more eye-opening. Obviously, no deep shots yet. One explosive touchdown, but no deep shots from JJ yet, right? Like hasn't gone deep. I'm fine with that because it's an inverse of what we saw last year to this point, right? Early in the season, it was deep shot, deep shot, deep shot. When it came to JJ, it was working. It was great. Middle of the season, it wasn't working. I'm fine with him building a rhythm, doing this kind of short, intermediate, like lightly long. And now, now you get into Big Ten play. Teams have an expectation, oh, they aren't going to whatever. And suddenly you're taking those deep shots. Now, when they do start taking those deep shots, that will open up. So this is a good segue into the run game, because that was a big part of why the run game was so effective last year. It was the mix between the run game and JJ using his legs. Teams recognize, like, we have to spy the quarterback. That is going to take one person in the personnel. And we also have to defend against the deep ball. Otherwise, we are just leaving ourselves totally susceptible. They haven't had to do that. They've been able to stack the box and do things of that nature. I do expect that this is some gamesmanship from Michigan, because what have we heard when Michigan does take those deep shots in some of these non-conference games? Why are you using that now? And this is a year where you don't have to use a lot of those things that maybe you're working on every single week in practice, certain big plays that you know that you can hit. They're your bread and butter plays that you might expect to see. You don't necessarily have to use those right out the gates, because you aren't going to see increased competition until Big Ten. And I don't know how good, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana are. And then Michigan State, we still don't know how good they are. If you ask their fans, they're amazing. And I'm starting to see why not go 12-0. I mean, that's not going to happen, Michigan State, but that's really great optimism. I like your enthusiasm. But we don't know how good they are, and we don't know how much Harlan Barnett's going to change the game. Harlan Barnett, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that you can kind of save things until you feel like you need it. You might all of a sudden see a completely new team, kind of like the Gauntlet in 2018, where it was suddenly like, what? Where was this? Right? That all three games kind of had that feeling to some degree. I mean, maybe not offensively against Michigan State, but in general, I mean, the Wisconsin and Penn State games assuredly was like, where was this? I would expect the last three games this season to have that similar feel when that happens. So let's continue on. I think maybe I have one more offensive thing to kind of touch on, because we touched on the pass game, we'll just move on to defense. I think that's probably fair. And then maybe we'll mop it up in the third segment. We're going to do that here in just one moment. Before we do, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. If you're watching on video, I am very well aware that I am dressed like a worship leader right now. I got a new outfit today, and I was just like, yeah, I want this. And then I put it on. I'm like, yeah, this is very strong worship leader vibes. Ready to go get my acoustic and my capo and all of that. Although I have an 8-string acoustic, which might not be the type of thing that worship leaders are accustomed to seeing. I have one 6-string guitar, and it's not an electric. It is an acoustic. I have a I had 2 7-strings. I sold one last year because I'm like, I'm never really going to play this again once I got my PRS, which used to be in the background here. I have a PRS 7-string. I have an 8-string Schecter, and I have an 8-string acoustic, and then I have I have a Seagull acoustic as well. So I keep on telling the worship leaders at my church are like, we'd love for you to join when we have our next tryout and everything. We'd love you to be a part of it. I'm like, yeah, maybe after the season that would be great. But at the same time, I'm like, can I bring my own guitar? Am I allowed to play those low strings? Like, you know, are you ready for the sheer violence of the style of guitar that I play? Anyway, all right, let's move on. Let's get to the defensive side of the ball. Expectations versus reality. And yeah, certainly, I don't think it's necessarily much different in some ways. So in a way, we're going to talk about how expectations have been met so far through 2 games. People were really upset coming out of week 1 about the lack of sacks. I was not, because I watched the game and not the stats. So they were getting plenty of pressure. Time was like, I was saying to Bryce next to me, I'm like, at some point, even with how quickly ECU is getting rid of the ball, they're going to get home. It didn't end up happening, but I mean, I'm going to bring it up again. I saw on the message boards people being like, Kenneth Grant is terrible after week 1, which is just hilarious, because I remember I said to Bryce, I said, Kenneth Grant is the best player on the field when he's out there. And then I asked a couple other people, and I was like, what do you think? And they were like, maybe, you know, it's kind of hard for, you know, some to kind of juggle looking through the lens and figuring out what's going on. And post game, I had asked, I said, who do you people, the people that were left in the, after the press conference and working in the media room, like, who do you think was the best player on defense for Michigan? And they got a unanimous Mike Sainmer still, which was like fair. I mean, he got the interception, everything. I'm like, I think it's Kenneth Grant, and he made that interception possible. And then week 2, he got home. 1.5 sacks for Kenneth Grant, 1.5 sacks for Jalen Harrell, half a sack for Mason Graham, half a sack for Crindy. Name's not Crindy. I can't remember the name. Hence, we're doing with the Arrested Development reference there. Nonetheless, incredible pass rush. Derek Moore was the other one. It's still want to see more from the edges in a way, but I mean, I guess Jalen Harrell got there twice, essentially. But I want to see the edges that aren't Jalen Harrell do it, right? That's what I want to see. I just feel like that, even though we're kind of accustomed, like the edges are great, and we did have questions going into the year. I'm also not used to the typical Michigan offseason bluster being absolutely accurate in when it comes to the interior pass rush being as good as it has been. Like, I feel like 2015 and 2016, if they said something in the offseason, it was like, well, yeah, that's going to come true, and it did. But I feel like when they started to move on, and it was probably less 26, maybe it was a little bit in 2017. I mean, like, they was there and it was right, because they were like, oh, Mo Hurst, he's a beast, and Mo Hurst was a beast. 2018, and Devin Bush is a beast. Devin Bush was a beast. It was kind of, I guess, more 2019, because you started getting to this point where it was like, Josh Ross is Devin Bush, but he makes Devin Bush look like he's never played football before. And then it was like, okay, that seems like a little bit of a hyperbole. And I think we all had a couple years of distrust when it came to that. And then last year they're talking about Mozzie Smith, and Mozzie Smith's taking a real step forward. And maybe the stats didn't bear that out because he was commanding so much attention and was still being a big run stopper and created. That's the other thing. People don't like to look at it as sometimes one guy getting attention creates opportunities for another guy, right? Chris Jenkins getting attention. I mean, he's not often on the field with Kenneth Grant at the same time. I've noticed thus far. I'd be curious to see the overlay, but I haven't noticed them on the field at the same time as often. Like, I would imagine if that is the case, though, he opens up opportunities for Kenneth Grant. I'm sure, again, the personnel groupings are things that we are going to see change as we get into deeper into the play, because they don't really need to sit there and play around and make people defend certain things. They might be trying to get some offensive things like Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum on the field at the same time, but they're also not like showing you exactly what they're going to do against Penn State 10 weeks from now, right? So I think that's smart. But defensively, the interior pass rush is 100% met muster. It has been phenomenal. It has been absolutely great. I want to see that continue. Of course, teams are going to continue to be like, we need to get rid of the ball quick. If this is like the 2016 team whatsoever, then you're going to have that still be like, okay, great. The coverage has been good enough. And I feel like it even got better last week than it was in week 1. The coverage is just phenomenal. And that really helps too, right? Like really all 3 levels. But the thing that makes it that much more exciting is the coverage has been great. There has not been like what we saw in 2020 when they're like, oh yeah, we got Jamon Green and Vincent Gray up. And you're like, oh, hopefully that works, just like every time that they've had to go to new cornerbacks. And it didn't until the next year, really. That you haven't had that issue with Josh Wallace, who obviously has a lot of time on task, played more than any other corner on the roster. But Keyshawn Harris, former walk-on, I don't care if like it's against East Carolina and UNLV. I mean, certain like maybe he would have gotten a scholarship offer to go to one of those 2 schools, but there's no guarantee. I'd be curious to see if he has a recruiting profile. If I spelled it like Keyshawn Bennett. I'm not sure what it would say, right? Like, I don't know if he has one because some of these guys don't, right? And I'm not seeing it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. I just want to see if we have a good idea. I'm not seeing one, at least on my choice of 24/7 sports. So that's, does he have any reported offers? I don't know. Maybe he does. I'm going to have to look on ESPN and we'll see if it doesn't have any of that stuff. So I'm not sure, but he's done a really good job with the task he's been given. But it's even more exciting with the idea that we've seen Keon Sabb, we've seen Zeke Berry, not last game. He only played the 1 snap in special teams and we didn't see him again. We've seen Quentin Johnston. We've seen Caden Colasar. We've seen Will Johnson for only a handful of snaps, so much that I didn't even recognize he was out there. We've seen Josh Wallace. We've seen Miles Pollard. We've seen all these other guys. We have not seen, really, truthfully, Will Johnson, Rod Moore, Makari Page. Makari Page had 10 snaps in week 1. It's going to be electric, right? Because you know how good Will Johnson and Rod Moore are. You know how good they are. It's going to be unbelievable when they get them back. Let's continue talking about the defense. I have another offensive thought that I meant to say in segment 1. We'll get to that here in just a moment. Before we do, everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and for their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you're not just hoping to have access to medication in an emergency. I mean, we all remember what happened in 2020, how difficult sometimes it was to get medication you needed. That's where you can avoid any of that. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off using the code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, promo code LOCKEDON. All right, so it's kind of for those of you who have ads, and I know there's some of you who don't. Most of you do. 99% of you probably get the ads. I think it's wild whenever it's like, hey, that's something that I've long been interested in, the Jase case, and I think it's cool that they're advertising with Locked On Wolverines. Anyway, let's move on to, well, not move on, but continue here into what I was going to say. I mean, the secondary has been phenomenal. The front has been phenomenal. The middle has been phenomenal. It's been great on defense, and it's not getting its due because Michigan's going to the backups halfway through the third quarter. So In terms of rushing allowed, they allowed 103 yards in week 1 and 61 in week 2. Passing, they allowed 132 in week 1 and 168 in week 2. Normally, I put out like how teams match up against each other according to national rankings. I'm kind of holding off on that until Big Ten play starts. But when it comes to total defense, Michigan is not the top Big Ten team. Weirdly, by kind of not a long shot, but they're behind several others. They are 13th in the country, behind Ohio State as the top defense, then Michigan State, then Minnesota, then Penn State, and then Michigan. But Penn State is the only one. But here's the thing: not every single one. Who did Minnesota play last week? I don't even remember. Don't remember who they played. But Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State all played FCS opponents last week. That's like a complete different tier, right? And then Indiana, who's 15th, played an FCS opponent, and Ohio State, who thinks that they have the best defense or offense in the country. So that's kind of amazing. Michigan at least played 2 mid-level group of 5 teams. I don't know that ECU is any good. UNLV at least beat its FCS team. I don't know. But Michigan's allowing 232 yards per game. Ohio State's allowing 193.5. But it played 2 very atrocious offenses and played some of their starters a little bit longer, right? Against Indiana, certainly they played their starters pretty much whole game. And that's such also the case. Michigan State played their starters a lot longer. Penn State had to play their starters a lot longer. Whereas Michigan is just kind of like, yeah, we're that's what we got. But, you aren't really seeing everybody. And we have several starters out there that haven't played yet. So I think that that's really interesting. Rush defense, Michigan is 26th at the moment. I fully expect them to be up in the top 5 once this all really starts. I mean, Rutgers is currently in the top 5. They are not going to finish in the top 5, right? They just aren't. Purdue's in the top 15. That's not going to happen. Pass defense, Ohio State 6, Penn State 7, Michigan 23. But again, like the last drive for either team has been a killer when Michigan's got that they've driven the field. And Michigan, if they decided like we want a stat pad and all of that stuff, this would look incredible, but they are not doing that like some other teams tend to do. So I think that that's a really good thing. The other thing I think is unexpected versus expectations is the fact that the Michigan method didn't happen when it comes to the offensive line in particular. Now, I didn't really expect it to happen at center. I think Drake Nugent, I've been long saying like I expect him to be that guy, and he is. I think it's more of the left tackle, right tackle. I mean, we all thought it was going to be Ladarius Henderson, and that I didn't know if it was going to be Carson Barnhart or Trente Jones. I probably would have leaned towards Carson Barnhart because once Trente was healthy, he didn't get his job back, which kind of sucks, but that's just kind of the name of the game. But I would not have said at any point before the part in fall camp when we heard it's going to, Carson Barnhart versus Ladarius and Trente versus Miles Hinton. I thought, okay, well, maybe you're looking at, I was like, maybe they'll slide Carson back over. I still kind of felt like it was going to be Ladarius and Carson, but I just didn't think that Ladarius Henderson wasn't going to win a job. I also didn't think that Miles Hinton was going to win the job. And yeah, it's a work in progress, but now we also know that is the starting 5. That is what it is. There's no really going off of that. That's just what it is. I mean, certainly it's subject to change at any point in time, and someone could surge in practice. Someone could have a bad game, and maybe they put someone else in, and then he ends up being good, or maybe it's an injury, blah, 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 blah. Plenty of different things. I definitely expected to see this kind of continue on, but now they at least have their starting 5, and now they can try to coalesce. I never know which word to use. So with that in mind, I think that's a little bit unexpected. I thought we'd see a lot more from the tight ends in terms of the pass game. I am somewhat surprised by that to some degree. I mean, Colston Loveland has 6 catches for 63 yards, so it's not too surprising. But when I've thrown for almost 600 yards thus far on the season, I'm kind of surprised that we're looking at 63 from Colston Loveland, 14 from Max Bredesen, and 12 from AJ Barner. I mean, we're not even to 100 yards out of the 600 to the tight ends. That actually kind of surprises me. But then again, we got 60 yards to Donovan Edwards. You've got 28 yards to Blake Corum. So, but I am surprised because I thought that number would be a bit higher. I thought that you would definitely be seeing Colston Loveland utilized a tiny bit more. But again, we are so early into this. We are just analyzing things way too early because that's what we have to look at, right? You can kind of analyze things based off of the guys you saw the year before. That helps you just so much, but it helps you more if it's a guy that, is a starter, not that great. Think of like Stevie Brown or Jeremy Gallen, guys who, when they're out there, you're like, I don't know, that guy kind of feels like a liability. And then the next year, you're like, oh, that guy got good. Vincent Gray, Jamon Green, those guys feel like liability. The ones that when you're sitting there talking about fall camp, all of the comments rolling in on social media are people saying, please shoot me because I would rather die than see that guy be on the field again. Right. And that's just hasn't, we just don't know how some of these guys have progressed. And some of these other guys are dealing with injury that we're still kind of waiting to see, like the Darius Clemens. Tyler Morris didn't really play in week 1 a little bit, but not a lot. And then really came on in week 2. So like, there's a lot to really still kind of feel out. I guess the last expectation versus reality is another, like, this is going exactly as I thought, but but at the same time, I've cautioned you, let's wait till midseason. Roman Wilson in particular. I mean, 10 catches, 167 yards, 5 touchdowns. When it comes to receiving and the amount of touchdowns in the country, he is tied for number 2. Behind only Will Shepard of Vanderbilt, who played in 3 games. So that's pretty good. The other one I would say is Cornelius Johnson, and I don't know that I expected him to be so consistent as he's been so far. Throwing in his direction, he's going to get it. Hard catch, easy catch, he's going to get it. I feel like we have spent most of Cornelius Johnson's career after he made that diving catch against Indiana in 2020. I feel like after that, it started to be like, put it up for Cornelius Johnson. We'll find out what you get when you find out. You didn't know what was going to happen. Now it's like you kind of feel like this is a good situation. This is great. So that's awesome. All right, that's going to do it for us today. We will talk more about what we want to see from the game. No Karan Higdon this week. No, we already did the mailbag earlier this week. The plan is to do a Saturday show before the game. And that will be not about the game necessarily. I think that we'll find something else to kind of delve into so it's a little more evergreen. We'll have our typical post game from the field that we're starting to do. It's just about a minute long, and then we will we'll try to do a Sunday episode. That's what the company plan is, to sell you the expectations. I don't know that it's going to happen this week with a night game and the fact that I probably won't go to bed till 6, 7 a.m. and then I have to be at church at 11. I just don't think that's going to happen this week. Maybe next week we'll start to be able to get into it. We'll see. Just to kind of give you an idea of what to hopefully expect. I am always wrong when I tell you, so expect 6 episodes on Sunday and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will be back very soon. Peace.